The city was alive with the usual rush, cars honking, people walking briskly, their faces pressed against the cold, biting wind of a late winter morning. But amidst the chaos, Ava sat in her wheelchair, her body heavy with the weight of her pregnancy, her eyes scanning the busy street. She'd been in this neighborhood countless times before, and each time she came, the sting of indifference, of judgment, was sharper. This time, though, it felt different. Something in the air told her that today, something was going to change. She had no idea how right she was. The corner cafe ahead was bustling, the sounds of coffee machines and the chatter of strangers a familiar comfort. But as she wheeled closer to the small business next door, something stopped her. The owner, a stout man with a permanent frown, stood behind the counter, casting a quick glance toward her. His eyes flickered for only a moment, but the look, dismissive, contemptuous, cut through her like a knife. Ava had long grown accustomed to the stares. Being pregnant and black, in a wheelchair, made her a target for every kind of prejudice. But today, something in that glance seemed heavier. She felt her stomach tighten, but she quickly looked away, rolling past the window, trying to escape the suffocating presence of judgment. Yet it was no use. As she reached the entrance, the door swung open and the man stepped outside, his posture rigid, his face full of disdain. Ava's heart skipped a beat. The sudden confrontation wasn't something she had anticipated. "Excuse me!" the man called, his voice sharp and cutting through the crowd of pedestrians around her. Ava froze, every instinct telling her to ignore him, to roll on and pretend she hadn't heard. But it was too late. "Yes?" she replied, trying to keep her voice steady, her hands gripping the wheels of her chair tightly. "You can't just hang around here," he said, his tone laced with impatience. "This is a business, not a place for people like you." The words hit her like a slap. The humiliation, the anger, it rushed through her in waves. She could feel the stares of passers-by, their eyes following her as though she were a spectacle, as though she didn't belong here. "People like me?" Ava repeated, her voice trembling with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "What's that supposed to mean?" The man didn't flinch. "You're taking up space. People like you shouldn't be here. Move along." The words were so blunt, so casually cruel, that Ava felt as if the air had been sucked out of her lungs. The weight of it, the weight of her disability, of her race, of the pregnancy, felt suffocating. She was nothing more than an inconvenience to him, someone who didn't deserve to occupy the same space as the rest of the world. Her eyes burned with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, she turned the wheels of her chair, slowly rolling away. The voices of the crowd seemed to grow louder, as if they were all silently complicit in his cruelty. Ava didn't know where to go, but she couldn't stay here, not like this. But as she rounded the corner, trying to escape the heat in her chest, she heard the sound of a door slamming behind her, and a voice shouting something, more words of shame, more words of cruelty. It wasn't just a man, it was a system that had learned to see her as nothing more than a burden. And in that moment, Ava knew. Today wasn't just any other day. This wasn't just a simple humiliation. This was the beginning of something that would either break her or force her to fight back. And Ava wasn't sure what that fight would look like. But she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't going to go down without a fight. Ava wheeled herself down the cracked pavement, her hands gripping the cold metal of her wheelchair tighter than ever. The wind bit at her face, but she didn't feel the sting anymore. All she could feel was the humiliation, the echo of those words that had followed her down the street. "People like you shouldn't be here." She could still hear the business owner's voice in her head, the way he had dismissed her with such ease, as if it were nothing, as if she were nothing. It wasn't the first time she had been treated this way, but something about today felt different. It wasn't just his words. It was the way everyone else had stood by, pretending not to hear, pretending not to see. They weren't overtly cruel, but their silence was its own kind of cruelty. It had always been this way, though, hadn't it? Ava had always been taught to be strong, to keep moving, to ignore the looks, the whispers, the stares. She had learned to keep her head high and pretend like it didn't matter. But today, she couldn't shake the feeling that the weight of it all was getting too much to bear. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, interrupting her thoughts. Ava pulled it out, hoping it was her mother checking in, but it was a text from her friend, Tamara. "Tamara, hey, I heard what happened. Are you okay?" Ava paused, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. She wanted to text back, "I'm fine, just tired." But the truth was, she wasn't fine. She was far from fine. So she typed back the only words that made sense, the words that felt raw and real. "Ava, I'm tired, Tamara. Really tired." She hit send before she could change her mind, before she could brush it off again. She was used to pretending, to smiling through the pain like nothing was wrong. But right now, she wasn't sure she could keep pretending. A few seconds later, her phone buzzed again. "Tamara, I'm so sorry. I can't even imagine what you're going through. Let's talk soon, okay?" Ava smiled faintly at her phone screen, grateful for Tamara's kindness, but also overwhelmed by the feeling of being alone in this struggle. Her friend was supportive, but Tamara didn't fully understand. How could she? Ava's battle wasn't just against one person, it was against the entire system. A system that had taught people like her that their place was always at the back, that they didn't matter. Ava had seen it all her life. Her mother, a strong black woman, had faced it with courage, fought back with every ounce of strength she had. Ava had watched her mother speak in front of large crowds, commanding the room with her knowledge and her truth. She had admired her strength, had wished to carry even a fraction of it. But now, as she faced the harsh truth of her own vulnerability, Ava wasn't sure she had it in her. She had always been the quiet one, the one who tried to avoid conflict. She had always believed that staying silent would help her. The days that followed the incident outside the small business felt like a slow suffocation. Ava had never realized how exhausting it could be to carry the weight of constant judgment, to have every move scrutinized, every glance filled with disdain. It wasn't just the business owner's words that echoed in her mind. It was the silence from everyone around her, the way no one had stood up, the way the world had just let it happen. She knew she had to keep going, that she couldn't let them see how deeply their cruelty had affected her, but she also couldn't escape the ache inside her. Ava found herself trapped in a cycle of frustration, anger, and self-doubt. She couldn't focus on her work. She had been a graphic designer, working remotely, but even the screen in front of her felt distant, impossible to engage with. She'd spent hours staring at the cursor blinking on a blank page, not knowing where to start, not knowing how to move forward. Her body felt heavier with every passing day, the pregnancy adding a weight she had learned to bear. But now, it seemed as though everything was just too much. Her wheelchair, once a tool for mobility, now felt like a cage, her limbs aching from the strain. She was tired. Tired in a way she couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't been in her shoes. Tired of fighting for basic dignity. Tired of trying to explain why she was just as worthy as anyone else. Tired of walking through the world feeling like a ghost, like someone who didn't belong in any space. One afternoon, after yet another exchange of unspoken judgments at the grocery store, Ava decided she needed to take a walk. She didn't know where she was going, but she knew she couldn't stay locked in her apartment any longer. She needed air. The cold wind hit her face as she made her way down the sidewalk, her eyes focused on the ground. Her thoughts were a jumble, racing between her frustration with the world and her inner battle to remain calm, to stay strong. But the weight of it was too much. Every step forward felt like an impossible climb, as if the world itself was pushing back against her. She passed the same cafe she had been to that fateful morning, the one she had fled from after the incident. The window was just as clear, the hustle and bustle inside just as vibrant, but this time Ava couldn't look away. She felt the pull of the place, the reminder of everything that had happened, the confrontation, the shame, the weight of a world that refused to see her for who she truly was. She could feel her heart pounding in her chest as she paused outside the door, the urge to turn away clawing at her. But then something stopped her. She saw the owner, the man who had humiliated her, standing at the counter laughing with a group of customers. His smile was wide, his demeanor casual, as if nothing had ever happened. It wasn't just the way he had spoken to her, it was the way he treated her as if she was invisible, as if she were nothing but an inconvenience. The more she watched, the angrier she became. Without thinking, Ava wheeled herself toward the door. Her hands gripped the wheels tighter than ever, and a surge of emotion took over. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about everything. The casual racism she had experienced her entire life, the indifference of those who stood by, who refused to act when something was wrong. She wasn't going to let it slide. Not anymore. As she entered the cafe, The noise inside seemed to quiet for a moment, the bustle of the place fading into the background. All eyes turned to her, and for a brief second, she felt like the spotlight was on her in the worst way. The owner looked up and froze, his eyes narrowing. He clearly recognized her, but there was something else there, something defensive, something that hinted at his awareness of the storm he had caused. Ava's voice shook, but she stood tall, every word coming out with a conviction that surprised her. "I'm here to talk to you," she said, her words cutting through the silence like a knife. "You humiliated me. You embarrassed me in front of people who didn't care. And you thought it was okay." The owner's expression faltered, but he quickly masked it with a forced smile. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, his voice cold, almost dismissive. Ava's fingers tightened around the wheelchair handles. She felt the blood rushing to her face, the anger rising, but she kept her voice steady. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. You made me feel like I didn't belong here, like I wasn't even a person. You told me to leave because I was in your way. But you know what? I'm not the one in the wrong here. It's people like you who are." The cafe patrons shifted uncomfortably in their seats, some of them casting nervous glances toward the door. Ava noticed a couple of them looking at her with pity, but it wasn't the kind of pity that made her feel seen. It was the kind of pity that came with judgment. She could see their eyes, wide, uncertain, maybe a little embarrassed, but they said nothing. No one said anything. The owner wiped his hands on his apron, trying to regain control. "Listen, lady," he began, his voice taking on a more condescending tone. "You need to calm down. I didn't mean to offend you, but you're taking this way too personally. It's just business. We're all trying to get through the day." Ava didn't let him finish. "Don't you dare tell me how to feel," she snapped, the words escaping before she could stop them. "Don't you dare brush me off like this is nothing. This isn't just about me. It's about every person you've ever made feel like they don't matter. And I've had enough." The owner opened his mouth, probably to make another dismissive comment, but Ava didn't let him speak. She wheeled herself around to face the people in the cafe, the ones who had been watching the scene unfold with uncomfortable expressions on their faces. "Look at me," she said, her voice growing louder. "I am a human being, and I am tired of being treated like I'm invisible. I'm tired of being treated like I don't belong, and I'm done letting people like him tell me I don't matter." She gestured toward the owner. "I matter. I'm worthy of respect, and I will fight for that respect until my last breath. No one gets to take that from me." For a long moment, there was nothing but silence. Ava could feel the weight of the room's gaze on her, some sympathetic, some uncomfortable, some angry. She didn't care. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't care what they thought. She wasn't going to apologize. She wasn't going to shrink. And then, as if the spell had been broken, one of the women sitting near the back stood up and clapped. Slowly, others joined in. The sound grew louder, more unified. For the first time in a long while, Ava felt like the world had stopped shaming her. They were standing with her. As she wheeled herself toward the door, the weight on her chest began to lift, just a little. She wasn't done. Not by a long shot. But today, she had made a statement. And that was just the beginning. Her heart still pounded in her chest as she rolled out of the cafe, the door swinging closed behind her. But Ava knew something now. She knew that no matter how many times the world tried to silence her, she would not be quiet. No matter how many people tried to tear her down, she would stand tall, she would fight, and she would never let them forget that she mattered. For the first time in a long while, Ava allowed herself a small, victorious smile. It wasn't over, but it was a start. Let's take a quick pause here. We'd love to know where you're listening from and whether you've had any similar experiences in your life. Your thoughts and feedback mean a lot to us. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to stay updated on the next parts of this story. We truly appreciate your support. Now, let's continue. The days after Ava's confrontation at the cafe felt like the calm before a storm. Although she had stood her ground, something lingered in the air. The anticipation of a consequence, the uncertainty of what would come next. She had made herself visible, but in a world where invisibility was a means of survival, that was dangerous. The incident at the cafe had shaken people, and now, Whispers followed her wherever she went. The next morning, when Ava wheeled herself down the narrow streets of her neighborhood, she noticed a shift. People seemed to move faster, their eyes darting away from her the moment they made contact. She passed by a group of young men standing on a corner, their voices a little too loud, their eyes a little too sharp. One of them snickered when he saw her, and she felt the burn of his gaze even after she had passed by. It wasn't just strangers, though. It was the familiar faces too, the ones who had been polite, distant, pretending to look the other way for years. Now, they were the ones staring. The ones who didn't even try to pretend anymore. Ava's chest tightened as she realized the truth of it all. She wasn't just being judged for being a black woman, for being pregnant, for being in a wheelchair. She was now being punished for not knowing her place. Ava stopped at the corner store, hoping to grab some milk before she headed home. But the moment she entered, the cashier, a young woman with dark eyes and a tight smile, looked her up and down before quickly looking away. Ava felt the weight of the glance, the coldness that radiated from her. She'd known this woman for years. She had once been friendly, always offering a kind word, but today she barely met her gaze. "Morning," Ava said softly, her voice trembling with the effort to keep it steady. "Yeah," the cashier replied, not meeting her eyes. "It's $2.50. Ava reached for her wallet, but the sting of the woman's indifference settled deeper into her bones. She had seen this before, this subtle dismissal, this refusal to see her as anything but an inconvenience. But it was different now. People weren't just ignoring her, they were actively shutting her out. As she handed over the money, she caught sight of a young boy who had been standing near the counter, watching her. His eyes were wide with curiosity, but there was something else in them, something Ava recognized all too well. Fear. Fear of what she represented. Fear of what she was forcing them to confront. It wasn't about her. It was about what her existence, her presence, did to them. It challenged the world they had created, the one where people like her were supposed to stay hidden, stay silent. She felt the tears well up in her eyes, but she forced them back. She wasn't going to break. Not now. Not like this. She couldn't let them see her weakness. Not when it seemed like the whole world had decided she wasn't worth a second glance. She wheeled herself out of the store, her grip tightening around the handles. The cold wind whipped against her face as she navigated the streets, but it didn't matter. The air felt heavy with the weight of all the things she couldn't change, all the things she couldn't control. Later that afternoon, Ava sat at home in front of her laptop, staring at the screen. But nothing was coming to her. She had always loved designing, but now her work felt pointless, like an escape from a reality she couldn't avoid. She couldn't stop thinking about the stares, the whispers, the judgments that followed her everywhere. It wasn't just a few people now. It was the entire world. Her phone buzzed, and she checked the screen to see a message from Tamara, her only true friend who had always been a shoulder to lean on. "Tamara, Ava, you there? I saw what happened yesterday. Are you okay?" Ava stared at the text, feeling a wave of exhaustion sweep over her. She hadn't even told Tamara about what had happened outside the cafe, but word had spread like wildfire. She had been trying to keep the weight of it all to herself, but now, with this message, the reality of everything hit her in full force. "Ava, I don't know, Tamara. I really don't know anymore. It's like I can't go anywhere without being judged. And it's not just strangers. It's people I've known my whole life. They don't even try to hide it. It's like I'm a problem." She stared at the message for a long moment before pressing send. It wasn't just about the business owner anymore. It wasn't just about the cruel words spoken in the heat of anger. It was about everything. The looks, the silence, the overwhelming feeling that the world would never let her forget that she didn't belong. "Tamara, I know, I get it. But you know what? You do belong. You deserve respect, and you've got me on your side, always." Ava read the message, her chest tightening with a mixture of relief and sadness. She appreciated Tamara's words, but deep down, she knew it wasn't enough. The world had a way of making you feel small, even when you were doing everything right. Ava knew that better than anyone. She had learned that lesson over and over again. Just as she was about to respond, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a notification from a local news app. She tapped it, expecting nothing more than the usual headlines. But the headline that greeted her stopped her cold. Local business owner faces backlash after discriminatory comments toward disabled customer. Ava's heart skipped a beat. The article went on to explain the incident at the cafe, describing how the business owner had made derogatory remarks toward a disabled pregnant woman in a wheelchair. There were quotes from customers who had witnessed the interaction, all condemning the owner's behavior. The article also mentioned that protests had started forming, with people demanding accountability for the owner's actions. But what shocked her the most was the final paragraph. The business has been temporarily closed for renovations, as the owner reportedly faces pressure from the community to address the allegations. Ava stared at the screen, the words blurring together in her vision. She had never expected this. She had never imagined that what had started as a quiet moment of humiliation would turn into something that could actually have consequences for the man who had disrespected her. But as the realization sank in, another feeling rose within her, a feeling she wasn't sure she was ready to confront. Was she glad? Did she want the business to close, to feel the same shame that she had? Part of her, the part that had been humiliated, wanted that. She wanted him to pay for what he'd done to her. But the other part, the part that still clung to the hope that people could change, that forgiveness could heal, felt conflicted. She stared at the screen for a long time, lost in the swell of emotions that churned inside her. Her thoughts were interrupted when a knock on the door sounded, pulling her out of her head. She wasn't expecting anyone, and when she opened it, she was taken aback by the person standing on the other side. It was the business owner. His face was pale, his expression tight. He looked almost apologetic, but there was something else in his eyes, something that made her stomach twist. I owe you an apology, he said, his voice stiff, as though he was struggling to get the words out. I've been thinking a lot about what happened, and I realized that I acted out of line. I was wrong. You didn't deserve that. Ava froze, her heart racing in her chest. This wasn't what she had expected. This wasn't how she had imagined this moment would go. She was prepared for a fight, for a confrontation. But an apology? From him? He seemed to sense her hesitation, and his voice softened. I've been hearing from the community. People are upset with me, and I get it now. I was wrong to treat you like that. You deserve better. Ava didn't know what to say. She had spent so much time feeling angry, feeling like the world owed her an apology, that she didn't know how to react to this sudden, unexpected shift. You don't get to decide how people like me are treated, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. You don't get to decide that I'm invisible just because I'm different. But I appreciate the apology. He nodded, looking as if he might say something more, but then he turned and walked away, leaving Ava standing at her door, her mind spinning. Was this the beginning of something? Could this man actually change? Or was this just another moment of silence, another temporary solution to a much larger problem? Ava closed the door behind her, leaning against it for a moment, letting the weight of the situation sink in. She didn't know what would come next, but she knew one thing: she couldn't stop fighting. No matter how many times the world tried to tear her down, she wouldn't stay silent, not anymore. The apology had been unexpected. Ava had stood in the doorway, watching the business owner walk away, his back slightly hunched, his posture far more vulnerable than she had anticipated. She hadn't expected any of it, least of all an apology. For a moment, the words hung in the air, and Ava stood still, as if the very weight of them was enough to pull her under. But then, the noise around her returned. The quiet streets, the distant honking of car horns, the rustling of wind in the trees, it all came rushing back. She closed the door with a soft click, locking herself inside, as if the world outside might be just a little too much to bear at that moment. In the days that followed, Ava couldn't shake the encounter from her mind. She'd expected resistance, even an apology with an ulterior motive, but the man had appeared genuine. His appearance on her doorstep still felt like a strange dream, like a fantasy she had conjured up in a moment of desperation. Despite his words, Ava couldn't bring herself to feel relief. The anger, the hurt, it was all still there. She was still the same person, still black, still disabled, still pregnant, and still battling every moment of her existence. Even after the apology, the weight of society's indifference to her humanity remained. The next day, Ava ventured outside again. The weather had turned cold, and the sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the city. She didn't know where she was going, but she needed to move. She needed to feel the streets beneath her wheels again, to remind herself that she was still in control. Her first stop was the same cafe where the incident had occurred. She wasn't sure why she went back. It wasn't for the coffee, certainly. It wasn't even for the business owner. It was something else. Maybe it was to see if the apology had meant anything, to see if she could feel something more than just anger and resentment. Maybe she just wanted to confront it all, to force herself to face the ghosts of the past few days. As she entered the cafe, the familiar chime of the doorbell sounded. For a moment, nothing seemed to change. The baristas continued making coffee. The customers murmured amongst themselves. Ava wheeled toward the counter, her heart thumping in her chest. She was met with a familiar face, the young woman who had been there the day the business owner had humiliated her. She looked up as Ava approached, her eyes widening slightly. "Hey," Ava said, her voice quieter than she expected. "I just wanted to know if the owner's in today." The barista hesitated for a moment, looking toward the back of the cafe before answering. "He's not here today. He's been staying out of sight for a while, actually." There was a softness in her voice, something Ava hadn't expected, but it didn't soothe the sting she still felt. "Okay," Ava replied, her voice breaking just a little. She felt a sudden wave of exhaustion, like the very weight of her body in the chair was too much to carry anymore. She had hoped for something different, something that would make this all feel less like a battle and more like a victory. But as she turned to leave, her thoughts tangled in a mess of uncertainty. A quiet voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. "You okay?" the barista asked, her tone hesitant. Ava stopped in her tracks, turning slowly to face her. She was surprised to hear the concern in the girl's voice. She hadn't expected anyone to care, not here, not after everything. "I'm fine," Ava said, forcing a smile. "Just tired." The barista nodded slowly. "I know you're upset. Everyone is. About what happened. It's just, people don't always know how to handle things like that. It wasn't right what he said, but some of us, we don't feel the same way." Ava looked at her, taken aback. "I don't need you to speak for him," she said sharply before catching herself. "Sorry, that came out wrong." The barista shook her head. "No, you're right. He messed up. We all know that." She looked down, then back at Ava. "I'm sorry for him, and for everyone who made you feel like you don't matter. We're not all like that here. I just wanted to say that." Ava stood there for a long moment, her heart racing. She hadn't expected kindness. Not here, not from this place, and it made her feel more vulnerable than she wanted to admit. She swallowed hard, her eyes stinging. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Then, without another word, she turned and wheeled herself back out of the cafe, leaving behind the warm glow of the lights and the lingering tension. But as she stepped back into the cold street, a thought hit her like a ton of bricks. Maybe, just maybe, not everyone was the same. Maybe there was hope. Not just for the world to change, but for people to change, to recognize the humanity in each other, to see beyond their judgments and stereotypes. Maybe. Later that evening, after dinner, Ava sat on her couch, scrolling through the messages on her phone. Tamara had sent her several texts, checking in on her, making sure she was okay. Ava had been avoiding the conversation, avoiding the reality of everything she had been feeling, but it was clear that Tamara had been waiting for her to respond. Tamara: "Ava, I know you're going through so much right now, but please don't close yourself off. You can talk to me. I'm here, always." Ava stared at the screen for a while, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. How could she explain everything that was going through her mind? How could she explain that she was tired of fighting, tired of always being the one to bear the brunt of everyone else's prejudice? But then, she typed, "Ava, I'm not okay. I'm tired, Tamara. I'm tired of carrying this weight, tired of being seen as less. I just want to feel like I matter, like I'm not invisible." She hit send and waited. For what? Ava didn't know. She wasn't sure if she even had the energy to explain it all, to pour out the mess inside her. But Tamara responded almost immediately. "Tamara, you do matter, Ava. You matter more than anyone I know. I wish you could see that. You deserve to be seen. And I see you. Always." Ava felt her heart break and heal at the same time. Tamara's words, so simple yet so powerful, wrapped around her like a blanket. But the fear lingered. Fear of the world. Fear of not being enough. She knew it wasn't just Tamara's words she needed. It was the whole world that needed to see her, needed to recognize her. It wasn't just about the cafe owner or the judgment she faced on a daily basis. It was about every single person who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. Every marginalized voice, every unseen soul. And as Ava sat in the silence of her apartment, the weight of the day's emotions pressing on her, she realized something. This wasn't about winning. It was about surviving. And if she had to survive by standing tall, by speaking out, by refusing to shrink, then that's what she would do. For the first time in days, Ava felt a spark of determination. She wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not ever. The world had been cruel, yes. But she had the power to rise above it, to show them that she mattered, to show them that they would never break her. And maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment where things began to shift. She wasn't alone in this fight. She didn't have to do it all by herself. And that thought, small as it was, made her believe that there could be a way forward after all. Tomorrow, she would start again. And maybe, just maybe, the world would be different. The days following the unexpected apology from the business owner had been filled with a sense of uneasy calm. Ava had hoped that the apology, the small act of acknowledgement, would ease the heavy tension she had been carrying. But instead, it had stirred something in her. A realization that the battle was far from over. She had been humiliated, shamed. But what struck her most was how easily people could disregard her humanity, how quickly they could cast her aside, simply because she was black, pregnant, and disabled. As Ava rolled down the familiar streets, the world around her continued to move on, indifferent to her presence. She had expected that the apology would somehow restore her faith, but in the end, it only made her more aware of the deeper issues that plagued her life. Racism, ableism, the way society had built walls around her, without her ever being asked if she wanted to be confined to them. People still looked at her with disdain, like she was nothing more than a problem to be solved, not a person deserving of respect. Her days were filled with a mixture of work, routine, and fleeting moments of peace. But the underlying anger that had settled in her heart never quite disappeared. Ava had always tried to keep a low profile, to move through life as quietly as possible. But now it felt like every step was a battle. It was a week after the apology that Ava's routine was once again disrupted. She had been sitting in her favorite cafe trying to focus on her work, when she overheard a conversation that made her freeze in her seat. A group of women sat at a nearby table, laughing and talking, but their voices grew louder as they spoke about the very incident she had been a part of just days earlier. Ava didn't need to hear every word to know they were talking about her appearance and the confrontation with the business owner. "Did you hear about that woman?" one of them said, her voice thick with condescension. "She went into that cafe all pregnant and in a wheelchair demanding an apology. Can you believe it? Some people just think they're entitled to everything." The other women giggled, their laughter like nails on a chalkboard. Ava's grip on her coffee cup tightened, but she didn't move. She didn't dare let them see her anger. The first woman continued, "It's not like she's the only one with problems. Everyone's got something to deal with. But you don't see anyone else throwing a fit like that." The words hit Ava like a slap. She wanted to stand up, to confront them, to scream that she wasn't throwing a fit, that she was simply asking for the basic respect she deserved. But she stayed still, her body frozen in place as the women continued their cruel discussion. They hadn't even bothered to whisper. They weren't ashamed of their judgment. Ava felt the weight of their words settle deep inside her chest. The humiliation, the degradation. It wasn't just in the stares of strangers. It was in the casual cruelty of people who didn't even think twice about treating her like she was less than them. She wasn't just a pregnant woman in a wheelchair. She wasn't just someone who had asked for an apology. To them, she was an inconvenience, a spectacle. She had become a symbol of everything they resented, everything they refused to understand. She could feel the heat rising in her face, but she kept her head down. She didn't want them to see the tears welling up in her eyes. She didn't want them to have that power over her. But as the laughter continued, she realized something. This wasn't just about them. This wasn't just about one group of women. This was about a world that had decided she didn't belong in it, that she didn't deserve the same treatment as others. This was about a system of hatred, of prejudice, that was built into every interaction, every glance, every word. Ava's phone buzzed on the table, interrupting her thoughts. She wiped her eyes quickly, trying to compose herself before picking it up. It was a message from Tamara. Tamara. Hey, I saw something on social media about the protest against the cafe. Are you okay? I know it's been tough. Ava stared at the message for a moment, unsure of how to respond. The protest Tamara mentioned had been organized by people who were outraged by the incident, outraged by how the business owner had treated her. She hadn't gone. She hadn't felt ready to step into that space, to be the center of attention. But as she looked down at her phone, Ava realized something. She had been letting fear control her for too long. Fear of confrontation, fear of being judged, fear of standing out. Ava, I'm not okay, Tamara. I'm really not. Every time I think I'm moving forward, something happens to remind me that I'm not equal. I'm invisible to them. I'm nothing more than a problem to be solved. She hit send and sat back, her mind spinning with everything that had happened in the past few days. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she had been letting them win. She had been letting the world dictate her worth, letting people like those women define her. Her phone buzzed again. Tamara. You matter, Ava, and you don't have to fight this alone. I'm here for you, always. Ava smiled faintly at the message, but the knot in her stomach remained. She wasn't sure if she could keep doing this. The world had been cruel, but now it felt like the cruelty was growing louder, more inescapable. That evening, as Ava sat in her apartment, the weight of the day pressing on her chest, she received another notification on her phone. This time, it was from a local news outlet. Local business under fire. Owner accused of discrimination following disabled customer incident. Ava's heart raced as she opened the article. The headline screamed at her, the words bold and unyielding. The article went on to describe how the cafe owner had been accused of discrimination, with quotes from various customers who had witnessed the incident. There were even a few mentions of protests and calls for the owner to be held accountable. Ava didn't know what to think. On one hand, it felt like a victory, like the world was finally acknowledging the injustice she had faced. But on the other hand, it felt like an empty gesture. The business was still open. The owner hadn't lost his position, and the system that allowed him to act with impunity was still in place. Ava wasn't sure if this small bit of attention would change anything. It wasn't enough. She closed the article and sat in the dark silence of her apartment, the weight of it all settling in her chest. She wasn't sure what to do next. She didn't know if she could keep fighting. She didn't know if she could keep going. But there was something inside her, something deep within her that refused to let go, something that kept her moving, kept her breathing, kept her alive in a world that seemed determined to break her. Ava's phone buzzed again, interrupting her thoughts. She picked it up and saw Tamara's message pop up on the screen. Tamara, don't let them win, Ava. They want you to back down, to stay quiet, but you can't. You deserve better. We all deserve better. Ava stared at the message, the words sinking deep into her heart. She didn't have the answers, and she didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of hope. Maybe it wasn't about winning. Maybe it was about surviving, about standing tall in the face of everything that tried to tear her down. With that thought, Ava took a deep breath and began typing her response. Ava, I won't back down. I can't. I will keep fighting. And as she hit send, a small part of her felt like maybe, just maybe, she was ready for whatever came next. The next day, Ava woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. She didn't know where this journey would take her, but she knew one thing. She wasn't done yet, and the world would hear her voice, whether it liked it or not. It was time to fight back. For herself. For everyone who had been made to feel less. For every person who had been told they didn't matter. She wasn't going to let the world silence her any longer. She would speak, and they would listen. The days that followed Ava's decision to fight back were filled with both determination and dread. Every step she took toward confronting the ugliness of the world felt like a step into unknown territory. The words that had been thrown at her, the way she had been dismissed, the way she had been made to feel invisible, all of it lingered like a thick fog, clouding her every move. But Ava had made up her mind. She wasn't going to shrink away any longer. She would face it head on. Her first act of defiance came when she decided to attend the protest that had been organized outside the cafe. She had resisted at first, unsure if she was ready to stand in front of the crowd. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that she had to. The world had already cast her as a problem to be solved, but she was more than that. She was a person, a human being, and she deserved to be seen. It was an early Saturday morning when Ava arrived at the protest. The small gathering had already started when she wheeled herself up to the front, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't sure if she would be recognized, but she didn't care. The signs, the chants, the voices filled the air, and for the first time in a long while, Ava felt a sense of solidarity. The people around her were fighting for what was right, and for once, she didn't feel alone. But as she looked around, she noticed something that made her stomach tighten. A group of men stood off to the side, whispering to each other, their eyes narrowing as they looked in her direction. It wasn't hard to tell what they were thinking. The expressions on their faces said it all. They were mocking the protest, mocking the people who were standing up for equality, for basic human decency. Ava's grip tightened on the wheels of her chair, but she stayed where she was. She didn't want to be intimidated. She wasn't going to let them win. One of the men, a tall figure with dark sunglasses, turned toward her. His voice was loud, deliberately so, as if he wanted her to hear him. "What's she doing here?" he sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "A woman in a wheelchair pregnant? Shouldn't she be at home taking care of herself instead of causing trouble?" Ava's heart clenched, but she refused to look away. The man's words cut deep, but they only fueled the fire inside her. She wasn't going to hide anymore. She wasn't going to let them make her feel small, make her feel like she didn't belong. This was her fight too, and no one was going to take that away from her. The man continued, louder now, knowing that his words were getting under her skin. Typical. Someone like her, thinking they can change the world. Just a bunch of whining people who think they're better than everyone else. The world doesn't owe you anything. Ava could feel the eyes of the crowd on her, some sympathetic, some filled with the same judgment that had haunted her for years. But the sting of his words didn't break her. It made her angry. Angry that people like him felt entitled to tear her down. Angry that people like him had the audacity to dismiss her struggles, her existence. She pushed her chair forward, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "You don't get to tell me where I belong. You don't get to decide what I deserve. I am not your problem. I am a human being, and I have every right to take up space in this world." For a moment, the man was silent. The crowd around them fell quiet too, as if waiting for something to happen. Ava didn't know if her words had reached him, or if he was too thick-headed to care, but she didn't need him to understand. She wasn't here to make him understand. She was here for herself, for every person who had ever been told they didn't matter, for every voice that had been silenced. The man scoffed, turning away, but the damage had been done. The hatred in his words had cut through the air, and even though he had backed off, Ava could feel the weight of his disdain lingering. She wasn't just fighting against him, she was fighting against an entire culture of people who refused to see her humanity, and that, more than anything, was what hurt. But then, something unexpected happened. A voice from the crowd spoke up, quiet at first, but growing louder with each passing second. "That's enough," someone said. "We're not here to put people down. We're here to fight for equality, for respect, for each other. Everyone belongs here." Ava turned to see a woman, older than her, standing with a group of young people who had gathered around her. She wasn't sure who the woman was, but her words cut through the tension like a knife. "Everyone here has a voice," the woman continued, her gaze shifting toward Ava. "And we're not going to let anyone tell us that we don't. You have every right to be here, to stand up for yourself." The words were a balm for the wound the man's cruelty had caused. Ava felt the heat in her chest subside, just a little. For the first time in a long time, she realized that she wasn't alone. There were others here, others who saw her for what she was, who understood the fight. And in that moment, she felt the weight of the world lift just a little. But the battle wasn't over. It never would be. As the protest continued, the crowd's voices growing louder, a deep sense of unease settled in Ava's chest. This wasn't just about one man, one business owner. This was about something much bigger. It was about a system that had been built to exclude people like her, to silence them. And no matter how loud the protests got, no matter how many voices rose in solidarity, there would always be those who would fight to keep things the way they were. Ava knew that. She knew that change didn't come easily, that the world didn't just shift because a few people decided they had had enough. But she also knew something else. She wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The protest ended in the late afternoon, with people slowly dispersing, but Ava lingered behind. She wasn't sure if it was the right time to go home, or if she even wanted to. The day had drained her in ways she didn't fully understand, but the spark of hope that had flickered earlier still burned inside her. She had faced something that day, something she hadn't expected. She had stood up to that man. She had taken the words that had tried to break her and used them as fuel to fight back. Ava wheeled herself to a nearby bench, sitting in the quiet of the evening as the sun dipped below the horizon. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the day settle on her shoulders. There was so much more to do, so many more battles to fight, but she wasn't alone anymore. Not really. As the last of the protesters trickled out, one of the young women from the group walked over to Ava. She was a tall, slender woman, her skin a deep brown that glowed in the fading light. She smiled softly, offering a hand. "You did great today," she said, her voice warm and kind. "You didn't back down. I saw it. I'm proud of you." Ava took the woman's hand, the words wrapping around her like a comfort she didn't know she needed. "Thank you," she said, her voice catching in her throat. "I didn't think I could do it." "You're stronger than you think," the woman replied, sitting beside Ava on the bench. "We all are. You've got this, and we've got you." And in that moment, Ava knew that this fight, this long, difficult fight, wasn't hers alone. It was everyone's, and together they would rise. She wasn't done, not by a long shot. As the days turned into weeks, Ava found herself standing at the edge of something she hadn't expected. Hope. It was fragile, still, and the world hadn't changed overnight. But the power of speaking out, of standing tall in the face of hatred, had given her something she hadn't realized she'd lost. Her belief that change was possible. She would keep fighting, for herself, for everyone who had ever been made to feel less. And one day, the world would listen. Ava woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly. She reached over to grab it, her fingers numb from the cold of the morning air that filtered through her window. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from Tamara. "Tamara, have you seen the news yet?" Ava's heart skipped a beat. She quickly unlocked her phone and opened the app. What she saw made her blood run cold. Controversy surrounding local cafe owner continues as customers demand accountability. The article headline blared at her, the words more familiar than she ever wanted them to be. She had seen it before. Her encounter, the words the cafe owner had spat at her, were now in the public eye. The story had gone viral, and it wasn't just about the incident anymore. It was about the systemic issue, the cruelty that people like her faced every day, the cruelty she had lived through her entire life. The world had seen her fight back, but it wasn't just her fight anymore. The backlash was just beginning. "Tamara, the protest you were at is all over the news. They're even interviewing people about it. And now, people are starting to pick sides." Ava felt her stomach churn. The last thing she wanted was to be at the center of some media storm. She hadn't asked for any of this. But as the words of the article sank in, she realized that the storm had already come, and there was no avoiding it. The story had taken on a life of its own, and now, she couldn't help but feel like she was being pulled into a war she didn't fully understand. The article detailed the aftermath of the protest, the way it had gained traction, how people were now flooding social media with opinions, videos, and hashtags. Everyone had something to say about what had happened to her. The online discourse had exploded, with some defending the cafe owner's actions, while others, many others, rallied behind her, calling for a boycott and demanding justice. But with that support came a darker side. The comments under every post, every article, were laced with vitriol. People were calling her a race baiter, accusing her of playing the victim, for merely existing in a world that refused to see her for who she was. There were those who claimed that her actions had been an overreaction, and that she was just trying to stir up trouble. Ava closed the article and sat still for a moment. The words felt like daggers piercing through her. The internet was a place where people could say anything, hide behind a screen and shout their hatred without ever having to face the consequences. Her phone buzzed again, and this time, it was a tweet from an anonymous user. The tweet read, "We don't need people like this making a scene. She's just looking for attention. Maybe if she stayed home, the world wouldn't be so bothered by her." The tweet had hundreds of retweets, thousands of likes. Ava's chest tightened as she scrolled through the endless stream of hateful comments. She couldn't escape it. They were everywhere. The hatred, the racism, it was all right there in front of her. It was too much to bear. For a moment, she thought about stepping away, about deleting her social media and retreating into silence. But something inside her refused to let go. The fire that had ignited within her the moment the cafe owner had humiliated her, that same fire burned brighter now. She wasn't going to hide. She couldn't hide. Not now. Not when everything was at stake. Ava stood up from her bed, the weight of her body more pronounced than ever. Her mind raced with all the things she wanted to say, the things she needed to say. She reached for her phone and opened up her social media accounts, her hands trembling as she typed out a message. "Ava, I am not a problem. I am not a nuisance. I'm a person. I deserve respect. No one gets to make me feel small anymore. This is my fight. It's for everyone who has been made to feel less. I will not be silenced." She hit send, and for the first time in days, she felt something shift inside of her. She wasn't going to let them define her. She wasn't going to let them break her. Underscore, 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 underscore. The next few days felt like a whirlwind. The post had gone viral, sparking an outpouring of support from people all over the world. It wasn't just her fight anymore. It was a movement. People of all races, ages, and backgrounds were reaching out to her, sharing their own stories of racism, discrimination, and struggle. Ava felt the weight of it all, but she also felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't alone, but that hope was quickly overshadowed by the backlash. The more people rallied behind her, the louder the hate grew. The cafe owner, now the center of a media firestorm, gave a public statement, offering his own apology, but denying any ill intentions. He claimed that he had simply been stressed and misunderstood, that his words had been taken out of context. Ava watched the interview on TV, her heart pounding as she listened to him twist the truth. His apology felt hollow, insincere. It was clear to her that he hadn't truly understood the gravity of what he had done. His words had been deliberate, not accidental. He had seen her as less than human, and no amount of backpedaling could undo that. But the real shock came when a local news anchor, a well-known face in the community, chimed in during the broadcast, defending the cafe owner. "It's important to remember," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "that businesses are under a lot of pressure these days. It's hard enough to make a living without dealing with protests and controversy. Maybe this whole thing could have been avoided if people just learned to not take things so personally." The anchor's words were a gut punch. She had just dismissed everything Ava had been through, everything she had fought for. In her eyes, Ava's pain was just an inconvenience. Her struggle was just noise. Ava's hands were shaking as she watched the broadcast. She could feel her anger rising, but it wasn't just anger. It was a mixture of frustration, exhaustion, and a deep, aching sadness. The world hadn't just refused to acknowledge her worth. It was actively trying to erase it. It wasn't just the cafe owner. It wasn't just the news anchor. It was everyone who had ever looked at her and thought she didn't deserve a place at the table. Underscore, 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 underscore. The following days were a blur of protests, interviews, and public statements. Ava was exhausted. Physically, mentally, emotionally. The weight of it all pressed down on her like a 1,000-pound anchor. But every time she wanted to give up, every time she thought about walking away, she reminded herself of something important. This fight was bigger than her. This was about every person who had ever been silenced, dismissed, or erased. She had received messages from people all over the country. Messages from other black women, from disabled individuals, from people who had faced similar injustices. They all thanked her for speaking out, for standing up. They told her that her bravery had inspired them to keep fighting, to keep speaking up, and in that, she found her strength. Ava spent hours reading the messages, responding where she could, finding solace in the solidarity. But it wasn't just the words of encouragement that kept her going. It was the growing realization that this wasn't just her fight anymore. This was a movement that would continue long after the protests ended, long after the media coverage died down. As the weeks passed, Ava's name became synonymous with resistance. People recognized her face on the street, and while some still gave her disdainful looks, many more smiled, nodded, and said thank you. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't easy, but it was progress. One afternoon, as Ava sat outside, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Tamara. Tamara, Ava, I've been reading about everything that's happened, and I just want you to know how proud I am of you. You've done something so important. Ava sat back, letting the words sink in. She wasn't sure how she felt about everything that had happened. There were still so many battles left to fight, so much pain left to heal. But she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't done yet. And she never would be. Ava, thanks, Tamara, but this isn't over. It's just the beginning. As she typed the words, Ava realized that she wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for a future where people like her didn't have to apologize for existing. She was fighting for a future where no one had to feel like they were invisible. And no matter how long it took, no matter how hard the road ahead was, she knew one thing. She would keep going. Because this fight, her fight, was worth every ounce of energy, every tear, every moment of pain. Because this time the world was going to listen. Ava stood at the edge of the city's central park, the wind biting her skin, and the cold air seeming to swallow everything around her. The protest had ended hours ago, but the echoes of the voices, the chants, the screams of justice still reverberated in her mind. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected to be at the center of such a firestorm. But here she was, at the heart of a movement, standing up for something far greater than herself. As she wheeled herself away from the protest site, she noticed a shift in the atmosphere. People passed by, glancing at her with varying expressions, some full of admiration, others full of disdain. It didn't matter how many strangers smiled at her, how many offered kind words. The deep-set cruelty of the world still lingered. People like her, people who were different, always found themselves fighting for validation, fighting to exist in a world that was built to make them feel like outsiders. Ava's mind was a whirlwind of emotions. The protest had been powerful. The calls for justice were palpable, the voices of those who had suffered long before her rising up in unison. But in the aftermath, it was easy to feel like it was all just a fleeting moment, a brief flash of light in a world filled with so much darkness. Her thoughts were interrupted by a voice calling out from behind her. "Hey, what's up, freak?" Ava tensed at the familiar sound. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. A group of teenagers, 2 boys and a girl, their faces twisted into sneers, was approaching her. They were dressed in cheap, gaudy clothes, their heads held high as if they owned the streets. The girl's eyes gleamed with malicious intent as she locked eyes with Ava. "What's wrong?" the girl continued, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You too busy to respond now that you've had your little protest? You think the world is going to change because of some people chanting your name?" Ava didn't respond at first. She could feel the weight of their gaze, the heat of their ridicule. The 2 boys behind the girl snickered, their laughter sharp, like knives carving into her skin. "You think you matter now, huh?" one of the boys taunted, his voice cold and mocking. "Look at you, all woke and empowered, thinking you can change anything, but you're just a pregnant girl in a wheelchair. No one cares about your issues. Go home and take care of your baby." The words hit Ava like a punch to the gut. For a split second, she was frozen, unable to respond. How many times had she heard people like them dismiss her pain, her fight, as if it were nothing? How many times had she been told to sit down, shut up, and be grateful for the scraps the world had given her? But she wasn't going to let them win this time. She wasn't going to shrink into the shadows, no matter how much they tried to drag her back there. "Shut up," Ava finally said, her voice trembling with anger. "You don't know a thing about me. You don't know what I've been through. what it's like to be treated like I don't matter. So don't stand there and act like you have the right to tell me who I am." The girl's eyes narrowed, her lip curling into a sneer. "Oh, I know exactly who you are. You're just like the rest of them, always making excuses, always looking for sympathy. You want to play the victim so badly, don't you? Get over yourself." Ava's breath quickened as her hands gripped the wheels of her chair. The words stung, but she didn't let them break her. She had fought for too long to let people like them tear her down. "You want to see who I really am?" Ava asked, her voice low but firm. "I'm someone who's tired of letting people like you tell me I don't belong. I'm tired of being the one who has to hide, the one who has to stay quiet, just so you can feel better about yourselves. I'm done with that." The girl laughed, the sound grating on Ava's nerves. "Oh, please. You think you're special because you're speaking out. No one cares. You think you can just shout your way into the world's sympathy, but it's not going to work. No one's listening to you. You're just another angry black woman with a chip on her shoulder." Ava's hands shook as she clenched them tighter. The words were poison, dripping with hatred and ignorance, but she refused to let them break her. She had heard them all her life. The assumptions, the stereotyping, the way they reduced her to nothing more than a label, a problem to be fixed. But she wasn't going to be defined by their hatred anymore. "No," Ava said, her voice stronger now. "You're wrong. I'm not angry because of what you think. I'm angry because people like you have been allowed to get away with treating people like me as if we don't matter. I'm angry because every day I have to prove that I'm just as human as you. But I'm not asking for your sympathy. I'm asking for respect." The girl faltered for a moment, as if Ava's words had hit her harder than she expected. But the boy behind her smirked, stepping forward as if to shield her. "You think you can change the world with your little speeches," he sneered. "You're wasting your time, lady. People like you are always going to be a burden on society." Ava felt the heat of his words, but she didn't flinch. "You don't know anything about me," she said, her voice steady, "and you never will. But one day, when the world wakes up, when it realizes that people like me matter, you'll be the ones left behind." She pushed herself past them, her hands pushing the wheels faster now, her heart pounding in her chest. She could feel the eyes of the group on her, could hear the whispers and the laughter, but she didn't care anymore. She wasn't going to stop. She wasn't going to back down. Not for them. Not for anyone. As Ava made her way down the street, the weight of their cruelty seemed to follow her. But she could feel something else too. A quiet strength, a sense of power that had been building inside her. She had faced their hatred, their ridicule, and she hadn't backed down. And that, more than anything, was what mattered. A few days later, Ava received a message that she hadn't expected. It was from someone she hadn't heard from in years, the business owner. "Ava, I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened, and I've realized that I've made a lot of mistakes. I treated you poorly, and I want to make it right. I can't change what I did, but I can do better. If you'll let me, I'd like to meet and talk about it. I truly am sorry for the way I acted." Ava stared at the message, her mind racing. Was this genuine? Or was it another attempt to save face, another empty apology? She didn't know, but as she sat there thinking about the weight of it all, she realized something. She didn't need his apology. She didn't need anyone's apology. What she needed was for people to understand that her worth wasn't up for debate. It wasn't about whether they thought she deserved respect. It was about the fact that she did, just by existing. And no one, not even him, could take that away from her. For the first time in a long while, Ava felt at peace. She had fought for herself, for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong, and that fight wasn't over. But she was standing tall, and that was all that mattered. She smiled as she closed her phone, a quiet resolve settling in her chest. This fight wasn't about one person or one incident. It was about something much bigger. It was about changing the world, one moment at a time. And Ava was ready for whatever came next. The world outside felt heavy. Ava could feel it in her bones, the weight of everything she had fought through, the endless battles that still lay ahead. But as she sat in her apartment, her mind swirling with thoughts of the protests, the fights, the hateful words, one thing stood clear. She had finally begun to see the world for what it was. She had started to see herself for who she was, someone worthy of respect, of space, of voice. And the fire inside her that had once flickered weakly was now an unrelenting blaze. The media coverage continued. The articles, the interviews, the endless opinions of people who had never walked in her shoes. It was a constant reminder of how far the world still had to go. But despite it all, Ava stood resolute. She had opened a door, cracked the foundation of a world that had long been built on the silencing of voices like hers. And now, she couldn't stop. But with that visibility came more than just applause. It came with more cruelty, more ridicule, more hate. One morning, as she was rolling down the street to get some air, she heard a group of people laughing in the distance. They were standing outside a coffee shop, their faces twisted in mockery. Ava felt her stomach tighten as she realized they were talking about her. She wasn't sure if they recognized her or if she was just another face in a sea of people that they felt they could belittle. But their words were louder than she anticipated. "Look at her," one of the men said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "She thinks she's something special. A pregnant woman in a wheelchair trying to tell the world that she matters. Who does she think she is?" Ava felt the sting of the words, the cruel dismissal of everything she had fought for. She kept her eyes straight ahead, trying not to let their judgment pierce through her, but it was hard. It always had been. How many times had people like them told her that she didn't belong? How many times had people treated her like she was invisible, like she wasn't even worth a second glance? One of the women laughed, a sound that felt like a slap in Ava's face. "I bet she's just looking for attention. Who cares if she's disabled? She's using it as an excuse. She doesn't get to be a hero just because she's different." The words burned in Ava's chest. She stopped in her tracks, her fingers tight around the wheels of her chair. This wasn't the first time she had heard such things, but today it felt different. The injustice of it all, the constant undermining of her humanity, of her worth, it was suffocating. Ava took a deep breath. She wasn't going to let them have this moment. She wasn't going to let them win. She turned toward them, her eyes steely with determination. "Do you know what it's like?" she asked, her voice louder than she intended. "Do you know what it's like to have the world tell you that you don't matter, that your pain, your struggle, your life isn't worth a damn? Do you think it's easy to get up every day knowing that people like you exist? People who think that just because I'm in a wheelchair, just because I'm pregnant, just because I'm black, I'm less than you? Do you know what it feels like to be made to feel invisible every single day of your life?" The group fell silent, their smirks fading as they stared at her. For a moment, Ava wasn't sure if she had gotten through to them. Maybe they would just laugh again, turn away and continue with their cruelty. But then, one of the women stepped forward, her face contorted in confusion. "You don't get it," the woman said, her tone defensive. "We're just saying—" "No," Ava interrupted, her voice cutting through the air. "You don't get it. You have no idea what it's like to live in a world that constantly tells you you're not enough. You have no idea what it's like to walk into a room and have people's eyes immediately judge you, to have them make assumptions about you based on nothing but your skin color, your condition, your gender. You're the ones who don't get it." Ava paused, feeling the weight of her words sink in. The anger that had been building inside her for so long was now spilling over. But it wasn't just anger. It was something more. It was the deep, abiding pain of a lifetime of being treated like she didn't matter, like she wasn't good enough. She could feel their gazes on her, their judgment still sharp. But now, it didn't matter. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't going to be the quiet, invisible person they wanted her to be. She was standing tall in every sense of the word. "I've spent my whole life trying to survive in a world that doesn't see me," Ava continued. "I've spent my whole life fighting to prove that I'm worth something. But you know what? I don't need your approval. I don't need your pity. I don't need any of it. What I need is for people like you to recognize that I exist, that I deserve to take up space in this world just as much as anyone else. That's all I'm asking for." The group stood in silence, the woman's expression slowly shifting from defiance to something that looked like realization. But Ava didn't wait for their apologies, for their acknowledgement. She wasn't here for that. She wasn't going to waste another second of her life begging people to understand her worth. Ava turned away and wheeled herself down the street, the weight of their stares following her like a shadow. But this time, it didn't matter. She had said what she needed to say, and she was done asking for permission to exist. She wasn't invisible anymore. Underscore, 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 underscore. The weeks that followed were difficult. The protests had gained momentum, and the media coverage was relentless. Ava had become a symbol of resistance, of defiance. But with that came a price. The hate from strangers had intensified, but so had the support. More people were joining the movement. More people were standing up, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel small. The movement was growing, and the voices that had once been silent were now echoing in unison. But even as the support grew, so did the opposition. The protests had reached a boiling point. There were those who still refused to see her as anything but a problem, a thorn in their side. It was no longer just the business owner. It was the people in power, the ones who would rather maintain the status quo than see real change. One evening, Ava received an anonymous message on her phone. She wasn't surprised. It wasn't the first time, but this one felt different. It was a threat. "You should be careful. People like you don't belong in this world. You'll never win. The sooner you realize that, the better off you'll be." Ava's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the message. She had heard words like these before, but this time they cut deeper. She wasn't just being dismissed now, she was being threatened. The fear that had once been a constant companion suddenly resurfaced. But as she looked at the message, something inside her clicked. She wasn't going to hide anymore. She wasn't going to back down. The fight was no longer just about her. It was about every person who had ever been silenced, and she wasn't going to let them win. Ava took a deep breath and replied to the message, her fingers steady on the screen. "You don't scare me. You never will. I'll keep fighting, and one day, people like you will have to answer for the hate you spread." She hit send and set the phone down, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. The threat didn't break her. It only made her stronger. The next morning, Ava woke up with a new sense of purpose. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't matter. She was fighting for the people who couldn't speak out, the ones who had been too scared to stand up. And she wasn't going to stop. She stepped outside into the cold morning air, her wheelchair rolling across the sidewalk, her mind clear. No matter what the world threw at her, she would keep fighting. For herself, for everyone. And one day, they would all be heard. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Have you experienced something similar in your life? How do you feel about the themes of racism and the fight for justice? Your feedback is incredibly important to us, and we truly value each and every one of you. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. We appreciate your support more than you know. Have a great day, and please leave a comment with the phrase, "I stand with you," so we know you've listened all the way through. We look forward to hearing from you.